What's up, everyone? Dylan here, and I want to give a quick warning about what's going on in the market right now. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but if you have, you'll see all the influencers. This is a topic I've talked about before, but you'll see all the influencers talking about the same thing. So, they're all talking about DeFi and Ethereum, right? And so there's a lot of things going on. And if you've been paying attention to the market, everything going on, you've seen that it's been kind of just oscillating, right? Everything's kind of going sideways, some things hitting lows, and then they'll bounce up some, and then they'll go back down. Well, I find that interesting, and the reason why that I'm giving you this warning is I'm always skeptical when everyone's talking about the same thing. When it's always everyone's the same thing. Everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, it's bullish, it's bullish, it's bullish." It's I think good to be skeptical and good to wait for all the data. And what I'm seeing right now, and this is just my opinion, my insight, not financial advice or anything like that, but I see a lot of these influencers, right? A lot of people that are in the crypto market, and I've talked about this before, is I think they like to shill their coins that they're invested in, right? They've attached themselves ideologically to certain coins, certain projects, and they have a vested financial interest in that project. And so as a result, I think they have a bias towards promoting that project. And I don't think anyone's immune from that. And I think it's totally fine. Like if you disclose, hey, this is a project I'm invested in, I like it, here's why, and this is why I'm talking about it, totally fine. And I think what I think is going on here is Ethereum was, I think from my understanding, it was like 150 bucks last year. It was super low. And most people are still up pretty big on Ethereum that got in over the past year, few years, right? If you've been in crypto for 4 or 5 years, you probably have been buying, you probably have bought Ethereum. And I think there's a lot of excitement about the future, the London fork, and the updates to Ethereum, and to hopefully reduce some fees and all that. So there's some anticipation being built in there. But I don't necessarily know if I think it might be too early to celebrate. And I think a lot of these influencers are getting excited by it. And so they're talking about it. They're like, oh my gosh, all these new things are coming out with Ethereum. It's amazing. All these new things are coming out with DeFi. It's amazing, right? And they're hyping it up. And I think we've been kind of beaten down by this market for the past couple months since the May crash. We've been beaten down by this market. And so we're looking for any sort of optimistic news. But if you remember like a week or two ago, Bitcoin was up at 41,000, and then it went back down, right? So it was down and then it started going back up, and then, it came back down. And I don't know exactly what Ethereum did, but Ethereum just like last week was at 1,800, right? 1,800, 1,900 bucks. And then it now has gone back up some, and there's a lot of bullish news surrounding Ethereum. And I think a lot of people want there to be bullish news around Ethereum. So they're projecting bullish news around Ethereum. But is that going to change the dynamic of the market, right? And I know there's been a lot of bullish news around DeFi. But just a few weeks ago, a whole DeFi platform got rug pulled. It was Iron Finance. So and I think a lot of people are excited about DeFi. I think they're going to be excited by it. And I think there's a lot of potential there. But I don't necessarily think the fundamentals of the market have completely changed. I know all the on-chain networks and all that kind of stuff, on-chain metrics and all that kind of stuff is just talking about how the whales are consolidating, companies are waiting for the big moves and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot going on. I don't know if it's I guess we'll have to see. Only time will tell. But I don't know if everything's just flipping a switch now and going full bullish. I think we're probably going to stay in the sideways time period for a little bit longer. And I do think there's a lot of potential, but maybe what we're seeing right now is some of that excitement priced into the market. People have gotten a little bit more money to put back in. People want to be confident in something, want to move towards something that they see can go up. The one big problem and the one big hurdle and the one big thing that everyone has to consider, at least from my perspective, when it comes to something like Ethereum, when it comes to something like DeFi, is how will that space be regulated, right? How will that space actually take off? And I've been going through the MIT blockchain course, and one of the things that Gary Gensler talks about is, what's the use case of the technology, right? What industry is it going to disrupt, and how is it going to disrupt it, and can it actually compete, right? If there's a big time industry that crypto or blockchain is going to disrupt, like finance, are they going to push back? or just adapt technologies that better suits them, right? And so these are all the questions you have to ask. And then if they already have their money in politicians' pockets, right? What type of regulations and things will come into play? Not even just because like they're paying off politicians or things like that, but there's a lot of regulations around how our finance industry works, right? Because it's very complex. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of ways that we've learned throughout history that people can be taken advantage of. Some ways that the market takes advantage of people now, but also a lot of rules are there to prevent it from continuing to take advantage of people. So I think that's a big thing to consider, is that it's still really early on in the process, which is exciting. But there's still a lot of like uncertainty for the future and how things will play out, how things will be regulated, what things will be allowed, what things won't be allowed. So while it's good to be excited, right? It's good to have that like bump in the market, like seeing a few DeFi plays bump up 20, 30% over the past couple of days. Like that's cool. Hearing them announcing new features, like that's all bullish. Like the technology is moving ahead, moving along, but just be careful, right? Be careful with the space, because, as soon as you get excited, that's when you get put in a trap. And I think Ethereum, I think everything's really a good price now. If you look at it from the perspective of like Bitcoin going to, going over 100,000, I think Bitcoin has the biggest and best use case and the easiest, the least risky use case. I think everyone else, all the other coins are mostly a speculation that are riding on Bitcoin's coattails, right? They're still dependent on Bitcoin, whether we like it or not. I was having a conversation with my dad the other night, and I'm just like, you can't discount the fact until something proves otherwise, like significantly proves otherwise. Everything is dependent on Bitcoin, right? The pulse of the market is set by Bitcoin. And so if anything's going to have tremendous all-time highs, right, or tremendous growth that's sustainable, Bitcoin needs to be growing, right? And there has to be a lot of confidence in the growth of Bitcoin and the growth of the market at this point in time, until something proves otherwise, right? Until something else takes the lead and says, no, I'm going to be the front runner and set the stage, which might never happen, right? People want it to happen, right? Because people are kind of annoyed with Bitcoin, right? They're kind of annoyed that Bitcoin sets the pace for everything, and because there's all these other cool blockchain technologies, they don't have the time to shine because everything bases off of Bitcoin. But the reality is that's how the market is, and that's a reality of the market until it isn't. And I think Michael Saylor said it best when he talks about it. He's like, look, like the most relevant piece of information isn't anything that happened in the past, right, for the market. It's not all these charts that show all the different cycles. The most relevant information is, when will some billionaire somewhere just buy $10 billion worth of Bitcoin or Ethereum? If they did that, like that's the information that you need to know, because that fundamentally changes the market. I saw someone in a tweet, they're like, what would that mean? Why is that significant if someone buys 10 billion worth of Bitcoin? It won't do anything to the price. Well, that'd be one of the biggest I think probably the biggest Bitcoin purchase ever. A $10 billion announcement. I think MicroStrategy owns about 3.5 billion worth, and they have 111,000 coins. I did the math the other day, just simple math, like nothing. It's not exact, but I think it'd be like 280,000 Bitcoins for $10 billion. So that'd be someone buying that. And the impact of that would be, like, first off, who's buying 10 billion worth, right? So that would be a major announcement, depending on who it is. Like if it's Facebook, right? That's going to travel, and that's going to be very, 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 very significant. But also every single news that reports on Bitcoin, on cryptocurrency, pretty much every single news media coverage is going to report on 10 billion. Every single influencer, everyone everywhere is going to report on that $10 billion, right? That's going to be a fundamental shift in the market. And it's events like that are really going to shape the future of the market, because people are talking about Ethereum hitting 10K, right? 10,000 a coin, and it's about 2,300 right now, about 250 billion. So to hit 10K, right, that's about a 4x, right? So a 4x return, so that's $1 trillion. That's what Bitcoin was before, right? And that is significant. So in order for Ethereum to really hit that, you'd be okay, what does Bitcoin need to do? Right? What does the feeling about Bitcoin have to be? Because if Bitcoin's going up, the money's flowing, and it's going in, and investment's coming in, then more likely investment can come into Ethereum. But one thing you have to think about is Bitcoin stalled out around 1 trillion, 1.2 trillion. And that might be the extent of where us as retail investors and traders and all that kind of stuff can take the market, right? It might be a struggle for us to take the market further. And that's why the institutions, that's why Michael Saylor's comment, it's like someone coming in with $10 billion, that's a big institution, that's a big time player, right? That represents a totally different shift, a totally different type of client, totally different type of investment into the industry. I think it's very important to keep in perspective when you're thinking about how, what you're investing in, what type of returns, what type of market, what type of use case things have, and lay that all out there. So you're not lying to yourself, or you're not being willfully ignorant when you go into an investment or you go into any sort of these cryptos. So I think it's very important to think about going forward. And just another thing to keep in mind is, people talk about the flipping Ethereum, flipping Bitcoin, and maybe it could do that at its current levels, right? Maybe. Like if Bitcoin stayed at its current price and Ethereum went back up to 500, 600 billion, you got a ton of investment, but you'd have to have a lot of, that would basically mean the whole market's going to be moving, all the altcoin market's moving while Bitcoin stays stable. And the likelihood of that happening is very slim, right? It's just not going to happen to where it plays out like that. And you also have to consider, right? And this is something I think is very important. And I'm just like, this is just my opinion, is that institutions, like if institutional money is going to be the catalyst for the growth of this market to the next level and beyond, right? To take, Bitcoin to 10 trillion, things like that, right? If those are events on your time horizon, if you want those events to happen or you believe they're possible, you have to say, how will they happen? And it's probably going to be big time institutional investment getting involved in crypto. So the problem with that is, or the way you have to look at it is if Bitcoin was the front runner this past year, maybe some institutions now at this point in time, 7 months into the year, have been able to move fast enough. 7 months be a pretty quick turnaround for a big time company to change a treasury strategy or talk with their shareholders and get the approval of the lawyers, everyone else, and get the systems in place, get the consulting that they needed to actually do a big time buy of crypto. Some smaller ones have, some of the fast movers, maybe the ones that are a little bit ahead of time. You've heard of the companies, but a lot of companies are very slow, right? They're big, right? They're big, slow, cumbersome, and it takes them a while. So perhaps they talked about investing in Ethereum and Bitcoin, but there's still more risk. Anyone who's advising these companies is going to say there's more risk in Ethereum because there's a lot of regulation that we don't know about. And these companies have to know about and have to consider the impact of regulation on their business. If they're not considering that, they're not going to stay around much longer. So perhaps some of the companies have allocated a lot of funds for Bitcoin. Maybe they have some for Ethereum, maybe, right? But the next wave is potentially where you're going to get a lot more of the Ethereum growth or the other altcoin growth. It's because, like, if they're investing into crypto for the first time, or if they're doing a major crypto strategy, the safest, least risky asset for them would be Bitcoin, right? Just by all the technicals and everything like that, it's probably the least risky, safest bet for most institutions to go and enter into and put some money in. And then what they probably would look at is like, okay, what happened then? Like, how did that investment play out? How did the market react, right? What is our next move? Should we even be adding more risk to our portfolio, or are these returns we're getting from Bitcoin enough, right? These big institutions, they don't need 1000x gains on their investment over, in a year, right? That's not their mindset. They have risk management teams that are in place for that reason, so they don't go and try to bet on these risky things and screw over their shareholders, right? That's just not how they operate. So, like, they're not, versus a retail investor, we're like, how can we find the next 1000x project, right? How can we put more money into Ethereum? Because it's, if it flips Bitcoin and Bitcoin is going to be 10 trillion, then Ethereum will be over 10 trillion. And that means Ethereum will be over $100,000 or so. And if it's $2,000 right now, that's a 50x, it's a 50x return, right? That sounds great, but how practical in theory is that going to be? And if Ethereum gets that big, who is it going to piss off, right? If Bitcoin's making people mad, countries mad, right? Making politicians mad, making certain institutions mad, right? And annoying them. Who's Ethereum gonna annoy, right? Right now, it's still just like a fly, right? DeFi is like, that's cute, right? Most financial institutions like, that's kind of cute. And if Bitcoin dies, well, maybe DeFi and all that kind of stuff dies. So it hasn't gotten big enough yet to merit any sort of like major consideration. And especially if at the end of the day, they're like, well, based on our analysis, there's a lot of things that it might be, not in compliance with. So if it does get big enough, we'll just regulate it and crush it, and then make it our own or do our own platform and things like that. So I think it's very important to consider. So anyways, to close this video up, there's a lot of good news around Ethereum, right? A lot of hype coming out of like Ethereum, Cardano, and all that. So it's cool. A lot of influencers have vested interest in those projects. So you got to be wary and take their advice with a grain of salt and form your own perspective on the market. Always do your own research on everything and always think about what's the use case for this crypto? Where's the money going to come from, right? The biggest idea is where is the money going to come from to make this grow, to make this investment grow, right? How is this going to carve out a new space in the market? What is its potential? And ask those questions, right? And then again, you know, we're not out of the woods yet, right? Things are have still been moving sideways. There hasn't been a significant push up. Ethereum's only 2,300. Yeah, I think maybe some of this excitement is because a lot of people bought in at 1,800 when it dipped down. Because before people were like, oh, if Ethereum dips down below $2,000, I'm going to buy in. So you probably had a bunch of money go into it from people that they're like, you know, stacking it back up. So just stuff to consider. Anyways, hopefully you enjoy this video. Go out there, do your own research, pay attention to things. Don't just take my word for it. Don't take influencers' word for it. Don't just buy the headlines. Pay attention and try to understand like what's happening, why it's happening, and make your decisions from there. All right, peace.